welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. If this is your first Crimes and Cocktails, welcome. If you've been here before, you know the drill. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a topic that is solvable with technology and people and expertise, but that is near and dear to retailers. We call it Crimes and Cocktails because ideally you'll have some fun stories to share, something to think about, and it might be the type of thing that you might share over a cocktail party. And so the series was born out of Signifyd's internal all hands, where we would share, for example, stories of people that would claim that they never got an above ground pool, but we have Google Earth evidence that, oh no, actually they installed it and used it. And so those types of fun stories are what we're trying to get to here, but then also some, real learning and a little bit of sharing of what's going on in the industry. So, if you haven't met me, I'm Bennett. I'm Chief Customer Officer at Signifyd. I partner with our worldwide clients, travel a lot, talk about these types of things or customer experiences and payment journeys and anything that could be a problem statement for the Walmarts, eBays, and then mom and pops on Shopify. I've been doing this for about 8.5 years. So really enjoy this type of stuff and talking with people about problems. I also have today Steve from our side. He's based in New York. He is an account security expert, having done so at American Express and at ACI. And so we're lucky to have him today to provide some of the backbone of the stories that we're going to be talking about. We're joined by one of our partners, Kasada, and specifically Jesse Martin, and he's an ops guy who has turned to the more cybersecurity side of things. And key to that ops piece, apparently jujitsu is one of his favorite things to do. So he'll take care of the physical and the digital. And then last we have Jarot, who's joining us from Warsaw. So thanks so much for joining so late in your evening. We're so lucky to have you. And Jarot's kind of leads everything at Groupon related to risk and payments and customer journey. And as many of the people on the call might be focused on is really focused on the growth and the customer experience and how do we enable that in a secure way. All three of these folks were recently promoted, so I don't know what I'm doing wrong that I wasn't, but congrats to each of you. And so we're lucky to have you, and clearly your work is appreciated at your different works. So welcome everybody. Let's start off with a poll. And this hopefully will help kind of get people thinking about the types of questions and the stuff that we'll be trying to do today. And so, in an e-commerce world, obviously guest checkout versus signed-in checkout, customer loyalty, all those types of initiatives are really tied to how much of your clients are signing in when they're trying to go through the checkout experience. So we'll leave this poll for a little bit, and then that will guide some of the ways that we discuss about this. We have some data on this. We'll show you some benchmarking so you can get a quick learning from that. But in general, what we're looking for is any trends as well. So if you have any questions or comments about this type of aspects of your business, please do let me know as you go through this in the Q&A function, and I'll pull that out. All right. Jesse, or Jarot, anything that you want to talk about as people are filling out this poll?
Yes, definitely. So thank you, Bennett, for the intro and welcome everyone. Definitely, I wanted to say that in case of the guest users and guest checkouts versus logged-in users, my comment to it would be that allowing users to decide whether to complete the purchase while being logged in or as a guest definitely enhances the seamlessness of the buying experience and can positively impact the conversion rates. As a side note, when considering, for example, good parcels, I personally opt for the locked-in purchases when the merchant provides benefits such as free returns for the registered customers. And I believe that demonstrates how the customer's incentives can influence the behavior and encourage account-based purchases while still maintaining that flexibility.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense, right? Because what we're finding is that retailers that offer value do have a lot more signed in experiences. And that can help with marketing, that can help with product research, and it can help with all the types of things, in terms of that. Okay, so Steve, I think you're up to talk about this in terms of the data, in terms of all of this stuff. But I'm gonna take an overview, and then I really want you to talk about why you think this is happening. So what we're seeing over time is that like about half of users use guest checkout. Um, and what we find, to Jarot's point, is conversion really can be hit when you are forced to create an account, right? From that perspective. And so, just as Jarot said, like we see conversion rate gets boosted when we can offer less friction. And so, Steve, I wanted you to talk a little bit about like kind of where this data is coming from in our database and kind of how we're portraying this information.
Yeah, so pretty much we use our network data, right, for a lot of these background stats. We try and track, based on how a customer is checking out, whether they are using the guest checkout, whether they're using a signed-in checkout, and we measure, approval rates, we measure fraud losses, we measure, overall growth of each segment. And as you can see here, we're definitely seeing a quarter-over-quarter increase, right, of increase in guest checkout experience. So it's definitely, super important for merchants to allow, customers to have this seamless experience and not just strictly, enforce a signed-in experience for the customers.
These types of numbers are wild to me. When I started working in e-commerce, I would consult with folks like Jet and Mark Laurie, and he would negotiate in his contracts. My business is going to be completely different 5 years from now because 75% of it's going to be logged in or more. So how do we project with that? And not many people have that today, and that vision of the world is possible perhaps for some folks, but it's not what we're seeing across our entire network. Jesse, I think I'm when you and I talked about this, like this is the type of data that maybe we see that maybe Kasada doesn't. There's some of the later stuff will definitely be like Kasada sees a lot of data that we don't. And so like from that perspective, just wanted to call out this is something that we think at Signifyd we really do see what actually gets sold. Did they sign in when they actually sold it? What was the ultimate settling price for that? What value did they drive? So if we can pull up the poll, I'm curious to see how the yeah. So we got a huge spread here from the panelists. Interestingly, the number one leading is I don't know, which doesn't surprise me in many ways. It's actually a kind of hard stat to pull out in terms of the way that some databases are put. Is it in the cart? Is it in the OMS? Is it in InfoSec? Kind of where is this information coming from? And so it can be hard to know what tracing together the transaction and the completed transaction with a login event. Sounds like it should be simple, but it actually is somewhat hard. Do you have some people claiming that they have like signed in experiences for the majority, and then so maybe 50-50 on balance but with the plurality definitely not being sure? Can be hard data to find, and I think it is actually really interesting to understand. Okay, all right, Steve, I think you mentioned that fraud by account age was something that you took a look at.
Yeah, so now before we took a look at how much increase we were seeing for guest checkout, and now we kind of want to see the flip side of that. We want to look at fraud losses based on account age, right? So this is really important for merchants, right? Because this directly affects the customer's experience when they're checking out, right? So in 2022, you can see majority of our fraud losses, right? It's this purple chart graph on the bottom is 67% of our fraud losses were on brand new created accounts or guest checkouts, right? And at the top, 22% in blue are attributed to fraud losses on accounts greater than a year old. But then in 2023 and so on, we saw a huge shift in fraud losses, now heavily focusing on fraud losses on accounts over a year old, right? So again, this shift is showing the importance that merchants we we work closely with on trying to improve, right, their account security, right? And, year over year, we continue to see, from 2023 to 2024, that these accounts over 1 year old are continuing to be a high target for fraudsters. And I know Jesse and Jarot, we talked about, fraud losses. And Jesse, I know you have a little bit more insight into kind of the fraud pressure, right, we're seeing on these ATO'd accounts. And I don't know if you have a little more insights on, are you also seeing heavy increase in fraud pressure here?
Dramatically, unfortunately. We're seeing account takeover traffic and attempts go up by about 2.5 times year on year. And I think the numbers that you have here based on account age, they make a lot of sense, right? The vector we see for that is credential stuffing, and credential stuffing relies on password reuse. And so that may be an account that's gotten a little old or a little dusty, or maybe even an account that predates an updated password security policy. So no surprise that those are kind of the most successful hits on a credential stuffing style attack.
Perfect. Yeah, no, definitely makes sense. And Jarot, I know we also talked about it also kind of depends on the region we're seeing, right? Because these stats I pulled are based on our entire Signifyd network history. But Jarot, from your experience, do you believe region has an impact to what type of ATO or brand new accounts being used for fraud?
Exactly, Steve. So, I believe that it's critical to consider always the different segments of your business when you do evaluate the fraud risks. So, definitely the fraud exposure can vary significantly based on the market conditions or the user behavior. So, we can have like on one hand like newly created or guest accounts, which may pose a higher fraud risk in certain markets. On the other hand, there are sleeper accounts which fraudsters can create in advance to bypass risk thresholds. So this could be a major concern for the businesses like with a longer customer engagement cycles. And definitely like my point of view for that is like understanding these regional and segment specific fraud attributes can help you as a business tailor the fraud prevention strategies more effectively.
Definitely. Okay, thank you for that, Jarot. I'll be moving to the next slide. Okay, now just quickly going over, I want to really hone in on ATO losses, right? Again, quick overview, ATO is just pretty much when an unregistered or unauthorized person logs into your account, makes changes on your account, and potentially buys an order. And now we want to look at our network losses, fraud losses on accounts over 1 year old. I'm more curious about how old are these accounts that are being used, right, for ATO. And you can see in 2022, majority of our losses, over 35%, were attributed to accounts around 1 year old. But then in 2023, 2024, we're seeing a huge spike in fraud losses on accounts greater than 5 year old. And if I can quickly go to the next slide, we have an interesting talking point here. On these older accounts greater than 5 year old, we want to really hone in on when was the password last reset, right? Because this is a key stat for most merchants, right? Especially merchants that don't have a proactive password reset policy. And we see a majority of these losses on accounts older than 5 years old. The password has not been reset in over 8 years, right? So these are just pretty much old accounts, most likely also dormant accounts that have their password floating around in the dark web somewhere from past data breaches that are just ready to be used by fraudsters. And Jarot and Jesse, I don't know if you have any comments. Are you also experiencing a rise in, old accounts, old passwords being used by fraudsters as we continue to see ATO on the rise?
I believe that, Steve, it is happening. And as a business, I believe it's always good to have a predefined rules and not to allow users to logged in with the old passwords. So forcing a password reset might definitely keep your fraudsters away.
Yeah, particularly if that password complexity policy has changed, or if MFA has become mandatory. Anything that is grandfathered that's older than that policy is exactly what you'd expect to go after. And this is no one is fully immune. I actually had an account compromised, one of mine, like an old streaming service account, and it was probably like in that leftmost bar, that like 20% of 8+ year old password, just because it lived in a password manager. I stopped thinking about it, and who knows where it might have been leaked from elsewhere, but that is precisely its age. So this one hits close to home.
No, thank you for your insights. And yeah, again, this graph, when we show this to a lot of merchants, it definitely puts into perspective of how important it is, right, to be able to have some sort of password reset policy.
It's compounding risk. Each year that you let go by, it's like, well, did this account get compromised anywhere else that it was used in the last year? Okay, then multiply that again by year 2, then multiply it again by year 3, then multiply it again, and it almost becomes an inevitability at some point. So.
Yeah, and some of it as a security practitioner, it's difficult because 10 years ago we told people have one really strong password and feel free to use that as your primary authentication mechanism, and that advice has not been as durable as we might have hoped.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Do customers care about this? Yes. I think that's one of the primary things that I always talk about with business folks is, hey, like your number one thing that you're telling me you're trying to build is trust and loyalty, right? And some people will swear by customer lifetime value, and some people will say, no, I don't believe in customer lifetime value. Whatever metric you and your organization use, at its core is, does the customer want to work with you? And will they come back, right? Like that's what you're trying to maximize. And so we do a lot of different polling, and we look at a lot of different polling. Very rarely do organizations and consumers actually agree on something like that, where they say that they care about the same things. Some people say, oh, sustainability. And it's like, well, but consumers won't actually pay for it. At least the US consumer won't. Or like this other thing, like, hey, I care about offering the best in class customer experience. And the consumers are like, hey, just make it suck less. Just make it base layer, like just make it work, right? This is one of those examples where we find that consumers and organizations are actually pretty similarly aligned. Hey, we got to do something about this. We believe that customers won't work with us if they don't think that their data is properly protected. And consumers say the same thing. But the difference is consumers say it's on the merchant. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to remember a password. I don't want to be bothered. Don't make me do 2FA, all this other kind of stuff. And so there's this tension, right, between what everybody says they want and how to make it suck less for the consumer from that perspective. And I think that's really important for us as we think about like the practices that can be put into place. How do you make it be a beautiful in-app customer experience if you are going to do that? How can you make it be seamless to the customer that they're being authenticated? How can you knock down fraud so only the good people get through, right, from that perspective? And then to the consumer, it's an ultimately frictionless experience, but the merchant is having to do all the heavy lifting from that perspective. We have our second poll here, and would love to kind of hear from the group, like, there are these 4 types of account takeover or account InfoSec risks that we're going to discuss. Steve's going to take us through them. Jesse and Jarot are going to chime in with kind of their own experiences. This is the how do people do what they do, the bad actors. Curious how many of these have you all experienced or that you are currently fighting in your own organizations. If you haven't experienced this, maybe you've experienced one of these on your own accounts. That is totally fine as a response as well. And we'll go into each one of these. Trojan accounts are probably one of the most classic example. Somebody takes over an account where you add in a new payment info, you take stolen financials, you do that. Phishing attacks, you probably get those all the time. I just got like 5 texts this morning, maybe because of this webinar. and so, like it's just people are being actively phished for their login credentials. One of my favorites is the CEO like texting, right, from that perspective. And I'm like, oh, that's not my CEO. And I can tell because of this, and this reason. But those happen often, now too. Sleeper accounts are ones that were created and then kind of stored, and then kind of look like they're real, but maybe not actually. And then session hijacking is pretty interesting, where you maybe collaboratively or not collaboratively have a device taken over, and then they're actually on that device going through a session. We'll talk through each one of these. So Steve, why don't you take us through some of these examples, and then we can pull up the poll here, maybe like after the first example, and kind of see what people have experienced or not.
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely we have around 5 examples of actual case studies, actual real orders that we've seen across our Signifyd network of ATO. And we really the purpose of this, we want to show what happens to the accounts, similar to those poll questions you're answering now. Like what do we actually see on these accounts that have been taken over? And once we understand, right, like what fraudsters are doing to accounts, it really helps merchants better prepare themselves, right, to fight this type of risk, right? It helps them understand, what security measures they need to put in place, what data points they need to look out for in unusual login activity, right? So from the basics, right, we're seeing email and password updates that fraudsters are doing on accounts, generally to lock out good customers of their accounts, or to potentially even appear as a genuine customer, right? Like, oh, I'm a returning customer and I'm resetting my password, right, to make a purchase. Fraudsters tend to email bomb genuine customers before they commit ATO, right, to break into someone's account, because this again helps prevent the genuine customer from noticing a merchant-related email that, oh, something was changed on my account, because they're getting bombarded with like hundreds of emails. And as Bennett was explaining, just Trojan schemes, we have examples of that where it's just an old account where a fraudster is now adding a stolen payment method to it. Okay. So on our first case example, we have just a very basic ATO with a stored payment method. This one, we kind of say this is like the perfect scenario for if you're a fraudster, right? So as you can see from this order, this is an account that was created back in 2015, right? And the password has not been reset or changed since 2015, right? So this is an 8+ year old account with an 8+ year old email. And as an added bonus, there is a stored payment method on file, right? You can see the billing age and days is 185 days. That just means the card has been stored there for 185 days. And once the fraudster logs in, they're able to use the stored payment method to complete their purchase. So again, it's just a very easy process. Once they see the card on file, they can purchase whatever goods they want. And I kind of want to talk with Jarot and Jesse about this too, because this is such a basic, ATO method with a stored payment method. What do you believe merchants can do to better protect themselves, right, from stored payment methods being abused and used by fraudsters?
Indeed, that is a classic one. I believe that a successful fraud strategy doesn't eliminate friction entirely. It introduces friction at the right time when the risk is high. So when I think about this scenario, when there is an ATO with the stored credit card, I believe that we as a merchants, we might want to add like additional verifications points, which might be like we might link stored payment methods to the consistent user behaviors, such as location or type of device used by the customer or a type of the deal. So that can help us like detect the anomalies. On the other hand, as a merchant, we might also want to consider like CVV entry for high risk transactions, like those large orders placed with the new devices, for example. That is definitely adding an extra security checkpoint for those stored payment methods.
Yeah, that's really sound advice. I mean, I know that we can often get locked into this mindset of authentication being kind of a binary condition, but the reality is we can step up and re-authenticate kind of anywhere that we see a key risk inflection point. So CVV or zip code validation makes sense. You could also, and again, taking this from kind of a business logic perspective, not so much the technological interventions directly. Things like setting a suspicion bit or setting a flag on an account that maybe has gone and updated its shipping address and its email address, maybe being a little more suspicious of that transaction. Because even, from a payment perspective, it might not look that unusual for someone to add a new card. Having a condition where you can label an account as suspicious, but still allow it to do the majority of what it does, or maybe require a little bit of that step-up authentication, is where you start to, I think, close the seam in between systems that fraudsters play in.
One thing that I just want to call out as we pull up the poll of the types of ATO that people have experienced, phishing is far and away the leader, right? That people have experienced. That makes sense. It's probably the most, personal facing. And then also, when your accounts get bombarded, like you kind of know that. And then Trojan and Sleeper are also pretty prevalent. And then session hijacking is probably going to be the most interesting for folks, maybe the most novel. And certainly the most sophisticated, I think, of the four types of account hacking. One thing that I'd note to any retailer, I always tell people, like, look, consumer expectations make it suck less. And for me, Amazon does a really good job. I think anybody who says that Amazon doesn't do a good job is not being honest with themselves. I have had a CVV challenge on ordering a gift card using an Amazon issued card to my sister's daughters, who I have bought every year on the same time, and I get CVV challenged every time. And so, as if that's kind of what they're having to do, like we that until that becomes the new same day delivery, like that customer experience is accepted, right, for certain types of transactions. So I do think people are scared to put some friction in front of their clients. You should be, but what I'd look at is what is market practice, look at what you're actually having to do, and then as Jesse mentioned and Jarot mentioned, put it when it makes sense so that you don't lose the sale. And I think that to me is the really critical point.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, guys. Yeah, no, that definitely resonates with these case examples that we'll be showing, right? Like, when can we add that friction to customers on risky account changes, right? Or risky activity from an account. And let's go to our next example. So for case 2, this is another common technique that we see amongst fraudsters, where this, again, it's an aged account. You can see the account was created back in September of 2011. But we see that the account password was reset first, and then the account was logged into, right? You can see on the bottom right, you can see the password was last reset August 13th at 15:36. And you can see the last successful login is actually within the minute after the password reset, right? So you can see the login was on August 13th at 15:37. So pretty much several seconds after. And we question ourselves, oh, how could this happen, right? Because normally, a genuine customer, especially if the email is not compromised, a genuine customer, they would trigger a password reset email, right? Link to be sent to them. You click on the email reset link, and then you can reset your password. So in this case, that's most likely what the fraudster had to do. They had to log in to the genuine customer's email to access the password reset link, which will allow them to reset the password. And often cases than not, customers, they're using the same password, right? In these examples, they're using the same password as their personal email and their merchant account. And a lot of older emails accounts, like they might not have 2FA set up, right? If you just keep, a lot of Gmail, they'll keep bugging you if you don't set it up, right? Oh, add a backup email, add a backup phone number to have like some sort of other authentication. But if you keep ignoring that, you could potentially just have an old email account with no 2FA set up. So this is, again, a tactic fraudsters can use. Or another method could be potentially the a customer was phished for the email reset link, I think is probably very unlikely. That's a very high effort method to use to get the email password reset, or the fraudster called in, right, to the help to the call center to help get a password reset. Again, I think is a very high effort approach for fraudsters. So in my experience, I believe most likely it's this could happen by, you know, the customer using the same email, same password for the personal email and the merchant email. Okay.
And adding to what Steve mentioned, like I believe that definitely in general, fraudsters rely on the human error. So touching this case with the fraudsters calling in to reset the passwords, I believe that us as a businesses, we should ensure that employees recognize that social engineering tactics as important as implementing technical security controls. Because once successful, fraudsters can impersonate legitimate users to manipulate customer support into resetting passwords. So when I'm thinking about this, like if a customer service is included in the password recovery process, as a merchant, you should keep definitely your teams aware about the social engineering and the latest fraud tactics. And in such instances, you might want to remove, for example, stored payment methods after such events like password reset, and or notify your customers via sharing the email with them saying that your password has been just changed.
Oh, actually, that's a great point you brought up, Yara. Like, I know at my time at American Express, right, that's one thing, you know, call center reps are definitely trained in on. It's trying to manage that balance of providing excellent customer experience, but also understanding that fraudsters do call in and you need to manage that risk, right? Like, and again, if anything is unusual or strange, definitely should be alerted, right? Like, if a customer is calling in 4 times in the past week to reset their password, yeah, something strange is going on, right? Odds are a couple of attempts might be from the fraudster, right? Here we have another interesting case is we call this like the fake password reset, right? So in this example, the fraudster logs into the account first, right? So you can see on the bottom right, the last successful login date. You can see the login timestamp was August 12th at 1929. And then after the account was logged into, the fraudster reset the password, right? So you can see on 1937, right? So 8 minutes after they logged in, they reset the password. And then the fraudulent order was placed. And we questioned ourselves like, oh, why would the fraudster do this, right? Because the email wasn't updated, right? So if I'm the genuine customer, I can easily, you know, trigger a password reset link to send to my email and I can recover my account. So why is the fraudster resetting my password but not changing my email? A lot of reasoning behind this is just honestly fraudsters are trying different things, right? They're trying new things to get around our rules, our AI model, or they're trying to mimic potentially genuine customer behavior, right? Like, oh, I'm a returning customer from a long time, forgot my password, so let me reset my password. And obviously the timing doesn't exactly match up, but again, fraudsters are just trying different methods to bypass AI models and rules. And Jesse and Yara, I'm sure you guys have experience with fraudsters, again, just trying different random things to bypass fraud strategy.
Oh yeah, they're almost admirably creative. I think what this really speaks to is understanding that when we see account takeover, at least from the Kasada perspective, we see it primarily through credential stuffing. And you're essentially running an automation playbook, not just testing username and password pairs, but likely doing something once you validate it. Oh, now I have account access. And that might be scraping for profile information so that you can resell that account and say, there's a stored method of payment, there's a co-brand credit card, there's a gift card loaded into this account. And in other cases, it may involve updating an email address or resetting a password to make sure that you have persistence of access when you resell that account. So now the password is something known to me, and it's more difficult for the genuine account holder to recover their account. In some cases, fraud is not as rapid as automated checkout, especially things like loyalty fraud. So sometimes you need a little more dwell time to fully execute your cybercrime.
Okay. No, thanks for that.
Definitely. I can also think about those examples where you might, as a merchant, have the rule-based system. In such instances, like a password change might be a positive indicator for your rules. So if you don't catch the fraud at this stage, you might be auto-approving such cases where there is a password change and maybe not high-risk transactions are there, but fraudsters are trying to buy something like a low value in the beginning, and later they might be back to buy some high value deals. So in this case, they mimic legitimate customer behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. And let me go to our last example. Actually, we have two more examples, I believe. Yep. Okay, so in this example, kind of labeled as just a complete account takeover, right? So in this situation, the email and password were changed on this old account, right? Created, you see, back in May of 2016, and a new payment method was added. So email, password, and a new payment method all changed. And we question ourselves, okay, in this scenario, why change the password and email, right? Because as you can see, the order was placed on November of 2024, but actually the fraudster changed the email and password months prior. So you see in the bottom right, the password and email were last updated on April of 2024. So almost 7 months prior. So our theory is that, fraudsters, there's several things they can do. They can receive digital goods that might be sent to the email and file, right? Let's say maybe some merchants, they offer digital gift cards, but they only allow that gift card to be sent to the email and file. So if you change the email and password, you can receive access to those gift cards. Also, this is maybe more common for like banking industries, right? So for your credit card usage, fraudsters, they can bypass security questions or 2FA, right? If issues occur with their order, right? So let's say they change your email months ago and it kind of flew under your radar, right? Maybe you weren't checking your emails or you just, weren't checking your account at all in general. If a fraudster comes back 7 months later, purchase something expensive, and let's say they get hit with 2FA, or let's say the fraudster even calls in to, let's say, American Express, like, hey, I have an issue with my order. And the call center rep, asks you, oh, can I send you a code verification? The fraudster can, bypass that since they have the new email on file. And also changing the email allows the genuine customer not to be notified of future purchases. Like in this example, right? The email was changed 7 months ago. So if the genuine customer doesn't notice this change, 7 months pass and the fraudster places an order, well, I'm not going to get an email notification, right? An order is being placed. I think let me move to the next example just for the sake of time. Okay. And this one is the sleeper account. This one we've been seeing increased pressure with a lot of our merchants. So what are sleeper accounts? So these are actually accounts, they're old accounts with little to no purchase history that all of a sudden are now being used in high volume to purchase high dollar orders. And here's an example to the right, you see. This account was created back in May of 2018. You can see on the top right, it's like the aggregate order count. So how many orders have been placed on this account in total is only one, and that includes the current purchase. So pretty much before that, there was no purchases beforehand. And we believe a lot of these accounts were just created by fraudsters, right? Maybe they ran a script, created thousands of accounts many years ago, and they're just aging these accounts, waiting to be used, 5, 6+ years in the future. And of course, a brand new card is always added in file. And Jarot and Jesse, I just want to talk about the importance of understanding how to recognize these accounts, right? Like, what do these accounts typically look like from your experience, and the importance of maybe potentially even purging a merchant's database of potentially old sleeper accounts from being used in the future.
It's a tricky thing, right? So I guess today's fake account creation is tomorrow's sleeper account attack. So the account creation endpoints have very often, I think, been a little bit overlooked. I think from a security and risk perspective, we look at login, we look at payment methods, and of course we look at checkout and anything that involves transactional dollars. But as long as we've kind of left the patio door open, so to speak, by not having the same rigorous protection on account creation, we will start to see this account aging because it's very inexpensive, right? You make your batch of accounts. We're seeing very clever fraudsters even do things like rotate these through residential proxy IP addresses. So you can't say, oh, this one IP address was involved in 10,000 account creations in about 90 seconds. So they're chronologically aging. What we'll see a little bit less of, and you probably have better visibility on this structurally, is how active they are during that chronological aging. Because as you see here, an account that is several years old has only ever placed one order of a medium dollar value. This might look a lot like aging, but seeing how active customers have been, have they added things to cart, have they abandoned carts, the activity as opposed to just the chronological age is a really interesting data point. But this is something we see happening from a fake account creation perspective and mass fake account creation across just about all sectors.
Indeed. And we need to remember that not all the accounts are good accounts. Some are just waiting to be activated for fraud. So like when I think about the strategies, detection strategies, definitely it's good to monitor all the accounts for sudden high value orders. So if you see a spike of all the accounts trying to buy high value orders, definitely it's a flag for you. As Jesse mentioned, you might also monitor those accounts created within your database by checking the IP addresses. If you see thousands of the accounts created from the same IP or from the same device, it is giving you a kind of a red flag for those. So definitely tracking, logging consistency, user's device, location, any changes might help you understand that those are the bad accounts.
Yeah, and this is just a super tricky, sometimes it's obvious, like Jarot said, maybe you just see a batch of accounts with the same IP being used. But to Jesse's point, it is super tricky sometimes. And that's where we work closely with merchants, right? To try and help them identify, work with their security team to identify strange activity, right? Over the past, 5, 6+ years, just trying to narrow down and identify, okay, what batch of accounts could potentially be the sleeper account based on these strange, occurrences, maybe certain emails being used, certain locations being used, the timestamps the accounts are created, just anything unusual. We try and look out for these sleeper accounts.
There's an added complexity that sometimes when marketing is really doing its job, you will see these large influxes of new account creation, right? It's exactly what we asked them to do. And you may even see, let's say, a campus-based activity. Now you have lots of users creating accounts from a similar IP, maybe around a similar time. So the other interesting nuancy attributes, I think, are what are going to be the more durable attributes to look for when we do a retrospective and say, of these old accounts, what characteristics should I be looking for?
Definitely. And I think we're getting close to time. So Ben, I'll move on to your final slide.
Yeah, just a little bit of last poll. And do you have a password reset policy? Maybe let's even say a password reset strategy in place. Let's because a policy is not going to cut it anymore. I don't think you might need to think about all the things that Jarot and Jesse have mentioned of, hey, have I taken a look at the accounts? Do I have an understanding? Do I have the data to be able to make an informed decision? The plurality of people, on this webinar who are joining it aren't sure how many people log in when they check out. So that might, it might be hard to have a policy in place for that if you don't know how to enforce it. It's very hard to have a strategy if you don't have the data to underpin that. So, anybody in this call would be a great expert to talk to just to kind of get the lay of the land. But curious about that. Spoiler, you should have a strategy. At a minimum, you should have a policy. And then some other pieces that I think are really helpful to understand. And it looks like most people are like, yeah, we do. Some people don't. And I would be very curious of the people who have a policy, how many feel like they have a strategy. But what I'd say here is you really do need to think about passwords differently. Consumers are thinking about passwords differently. Everyone's been a subject of a data breach. Everyone's been a subject of a phishing attack. This is omnipresent, and consumers do care. They just don't want to do anything about it. So we got to make sure that we protect them from themselves. And two-factor is an incredible way, seamless checkout experiences. I'm way more likely to install an app on my phone if it lets me be secure and if it lets me be able to actually engage with the brand in a way where I don't have to use a password. I feel way more secure that way. So that at least works for me. Plenty of other consumers feel similarly. Any type of stored payment methods, as soon as you have a wallet, as soon as you have loyalty points that can be turned into cash, as soon as you have a digital currency, as soon as you have anything like that, it's a honeypot. And then all of a sudden you're pretty close to like a small bank. And if that sounds scary, it should be. And so how do you actually think about how to secure that value? Anytime that you have stored cards and you have a dollar change or you have an address change or anything like that, consumers want to feel secure, do that CVV check. Anytime that you can have a challenge, what good is challenging an email when you just updated the email? What good is challenging the phone when they just updated the phone? You have to have business logic, rules logic, or a model behind like guiding you on what to do. And then really, this is the part that always is interesting to me. I'll talk with folks and they'll be like, yeah, we have all these Trojan accounts or these sleeper accounts, and they don't go and deactivate them. And I'm like, oh, are you going to study them to see what they're doing and to learn from the fraudsters and blah, blah, blah? And they're like, oh, no, we just know that they're there. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe get rid of them. So that's why I talk about in terms of a strategy, right? Like, hey, having a policy in place is one thing, but once you've identified that people are in your house, kick them out. Makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I'd say is, make sure you have somebody who can do all of the types of investigatory work, and so that you can have the proper technologies in place to automate. But our very strong opinion is the investigative, the analyst, the strategy side of things is so important on each of these different activities. So that'd be a checklist for those of you. And again, if you want to talk to Kasada or to Signifyd, we'd love to chat with you on how to do that. And then what I'd say then is, thanks so much. We're kind of right on time. We're gonna send you a themed cocktail recipe so that you can do that. If you want to share that on LinkedIn, or with us, we'd love to see kind of you like enjoying that over some of these stories. And I hope everybody has a safer 2025 despite all the fraud pressure that we're under. And I think we can do it as a group. So hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.